Hey everyone! Welcome to the Bold and Beautiful 24. I'm Alessio, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love Bold and Beautiful, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. Oh my god. A gunshot wound to the stomach, Brooke's bleeding collapse, and Thomas's icy departure. The night that forever changed the Forrester, Logan, and Spencer families began not with a scream, but with the eerie silence of a living room drenched in tension, the kind of silence that crackles like electricity before a storm, and Brooke Logan, ever the centerpiece of chaotic passion and unyielding devotion, found herself staring into the wild, tormented eyes of Thomas Forrester, who stood across the room holding the very thing she had always feared he might one day wield in a moment of obsession-driven madness, a gun, polished steel catching the reflection of the dim lights overhead as though mocking the fragility of the woman before him. Brooke's voice cracked as she tried, desperately, to summon her maternal authority, her sharp wit, her ironclad presence that had once tamed Ridge, Bill, and even Deacon in their darkest hours, but Thomas was beyond the point of reason, beyond persuasion. His breaths shallow and uneven as he accused her of ruining his life, of poisoning Douglas against him, of being the eternal roadblock between him and the happiness he believed was his birthright. And though Brooke's instincts screamed at her to run, to call for Ridge, to summon anyone who could pull Thomas back from this brink, she instead did what she always did when her family teetered on the edge of destruction. She stood firm, her chin tilted in defiance, her eyes burning with a fire that said, "If you want to break this family, you'll have to go through me." However, she failed to recognize the volcano of anger that had been building within of her during that moment of disobedience. Thomas, ever since hope had pulled away from him, since Douglas had preferred the safety of the cabin over the edge of his father's apartment, since Ridge had once again chosen Brooke's intoxicating pull over the loyalty to his children, and with a suddenness that stole the very air from the room, the gunshot thundered through the Forrester estate like an explosion of all their sins. Brooke's body jerked violently as the bullet tore into her stomach, the sharp, searing pain ripping through her core, and for the first time in her life she felt powerless, not in the metaphorical way of losing a lover or being betrayed by a friend, but in the most visceral, horrifying way a human being could feel powerless, the inability to stop her own body from collapsing beneath her. Blood, warm and metallic, spread across the white silk blouse she had chosen as though she were preparing for a confrontation but never imagining it would be her shroud, and she staggered backward, her hand clutching her abdomen, her eyes widening in both disbelief and heartbreak as she whispered, "Thomas," not in anger, not in condemnation, but in sorrow, sorrow for him, sorrow for Ridge who would one day learn his son had destroyed the woman he loved most, sorrow for Hope who would carry the burden of knowing her stepbrother had taken her mother from her, sorrow for her sisters who would wail in grief and fury, sorrow for her children who would never hear her laugh echo across the room again, and yet Thomas, standing there with smoke curling from the barrel of the gun, felt no sorrow in that second, only a cold, detached triumph as though he had finally silenced the voice that had haunted him since childhood, the voice that told him he wasn't enough, that he wasn't Ridge's priority, that Brooke Logan was always the sun around which everyone orbited while he remained in the shadows. And as Brooke crumpled to the floor, her blood seeping into the hardwood, Thomas turned, his face unreadable, his hand steady despite the act he had just committed, and without so much as a backward glance he walked away, the gun still in his hand like an extension of his rage, his footsteps echoing through the hallway in chilling rhythm, leaving behind the shattered woman who had once tried to save him from himself. Brooke gasped for air, each inhale rattling as crimson stained her lips, her thoughts flashing in fragmented images. Ridge's arms around her, Hope's first cries as a newborn, the Malibu house with its sunsets of promise, the bitter fights with Taylor, the champagne flutes clinking at family weddings, the betrayals, the make-ups, the eternal cycle of desire and heartbreak that defined her existence. And in those fleeting flashes she realized she had always lived on the knife's edge of passion and destruction, but never had she thought it would end like this, alone on the floor of the home she once believed was her sanctuary, fighting not just for her life, but for the chance to tell Ridge one last time that no matter what, no matter the mistakes, no matter the other women, she had always loved him. Her trembling fingers reached for her phone, smeared with blood, trying to dial anyone, Ridge, Hope, even Katie, but the device slipped from her weakening grip, clattering against the wood just out of reach, and tears blurred her vision as her body weakened further, while outside the mansion the world carried on oblivious, the Los Angeles night glittering with shallow stars, unaware that a legacy, a dynasty, a matriarch was bleeding out in silence. And Thomas, slipping into the shadows with the gun still heavy in his palm, convinced himself that he had not destroyed his father's great love, but rather liberated himself from decades of humiliation. Yet deep in his soul, beneath the layers of anger and obsession, there flickered the tiniest ember of horror at what he had done, an ember he tried to smother by walking faster, by refusing to look back, by telling himself over and over that Brooke had left him no choice. Though he knew that in the coming hours, when the family discovered her body, when Ridge fell to his knees beside her, when Hope screamed in anguish, when the sirens wailed and the doctors tried to save what little life remained in her fragile form, his name would be etched not just in the headlines, but in the blood-stained memory of everyone who had ever loved Brooke Logan, and there would be no redemption, no forgiveness, only the cold, irrevocable truth that Thomas Forrester had put a bullet in the heart of the woman his father had loved more than anyone else. And as Brooke's eyes fluttered shut, the darkness closing in around her, she whispered one last word, not help, not please, but simply Ridge, a final tether to the man who had defined her story, even as the shadows swallowed her whole. Blood still pooling beneath her, Brooke Logan's body barely clinging to life, the sound of her own ragged breaths the only rhythm in the room, the mansion seemed to warp around the violent act that had just occurred, walls echoing the metallic clang of the dropped phone, the faint creak of a door left ajar, as Ridge Forrester, summoned by the faint scream that Brooke had managed before collapse, burst through the hallway with the force of pure panic propelling him forward, his usually controlled, measured steps replaced by a frantic storm of disbelief and horror, his eyes locking onto Brooke's prone form sprawled across the cold hardwood as if the universe had betrayed him personally in this very instant, and he dropped to his knees beside her, hands trembling as he cradled her against his chest, fingers pressing desperately against the wound in a feeble attempt to staunch the crimson flow, the metallic scent of blood filling his nostrils and sending a visceral pang through his soul, while his mind raced in a blur, recalling every moment they had shared, every kiss on the Forrester deck at sunset, every wedding vow that had been whispered in secret gardens, every argument that had ended in laughter instead of rage. And now, all of it seemed to teeter on the knife's edge of obliteration, as if the very essence of Ridge's life had been ripped from him with that single shot. And yet, even as his heart threatened to shatter, he knew he had to act, had to summon help. Before it was too late, his hands shaking, he dialed Hope's number with a frantic urgency, every ring a lifetime of waiting, until the younger Logan's voice finally answered, brittle with worry and echoing grief. And when Ridge's trembling words reached her, Hope dropped everything. The medical conference she had been running, the text from Liam she hadn't yet answered, the rehearsed control she tried to maintain over every chaotic moment of her life, and she sprinted through the city streets in a whirlwind of fear and maternal instinct, her heels clattering against pavement like gunshots of their own, while Taylor Hayes, receiving the news at home, collapsed into her own despair, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white as she whispered frantic prayers that the woman who had been both rival and sister to her heart would survive, and all the while, Thomas Forrester, somewhere beyond the estate, felt a fleeting, chilling thrill that quickly turned sour in his gut as doubt crept in like a poisonous fog. He had left Brooke bleeding and vulnerable, believing he had asserted ultimate control over the chaos of his own life, yet even as he walked down the dimly lit streets, gun tucked into his jacket, the echo of Brooke's gasp, the sight of her collapsing form, haunted him, gnawing at the edges of his arrogance, because deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning, that every action carried consequences, and that Ridge would stop at nothing to save her, Hope would fight like a lioness to protect her mother, and the world would rally in response to the violent rupture he had created. By the time Brooke was wheeled into the emergency room, the fluorescent lights blinding her hazel-brown eyes, the chaos was absolute. Lee Finnegan and Dr. Grace Buckingham coordinated with precise urgency, the medical team moving like clockwork under pressure, while Ridge hovered at the edge of the room, white-knuckled, watching every movement, his hands ringing uselessly, prayers escaping in whispered gasps, and Hope, breathless and wild-eyed, refused to let anyone push her back, her very presence a storm of emotional energy that seemed to crackle against the sterile hospital walls, and as Brooke's vitals dipped dangerously, monitors beeping like relentless war drums, Dr. Buckingham called for immediate surgery, shouting instructions while Lee's calm, methodical voice cut through the panic, ordering blood transfusions, prepping the ore, while Ridge and Hope were escorted to a nearby observation area, their hands gripping each other's in a silent vow to hold on, to endure, as the life of the woman they loved hung by the thinnest thread. All the while, Thomas, unaware of the full fury he had unleashed, felt a creeping sense of isolation, a shadow of the consequence that would soon chase him, because in a city like Los Angeles, in families like the Forresters and Logans, no act of violence exists in a vacuum, and the ripple effects of one cold, selfish moment could shatter reputations, relationships, and even lives beyond repair. Meanwhile, as the surgical team raced against time, Brooke's eyes flickered open in fleeting moments of consciousness, her gaze landing on Ridge first, her voice a fragile whisper of love and apology, and then on Hope, whose tears streaked down her cheeks as she bent closer, murmuring encouragement and fierce promises that her mother would survive, while Taylor, restrained from bursting into the oar, paced like a caged animal, every nerve on fire, imagining the worst, imagining Thomas walking free, imagining Ridge's despair turning into rage that might one day consume him entirely, and across the city, Liam Spencer received frantic messages from Hope and Ridge, his own mind a tumult of horror and helplessness, already picturing the headlines, already imagining Thomas as the villain in a story no one could undo, and in that instant, the mansion where it all began felt worlds away, replaced by a hospital where every second ticked like an eternity, monitors blaring, voices shouting, lives hanging by a thread, and all the while, Thomas Forrester, wandering alone through the dark streets, felt the first prickle of fear mixed with adrenaline, a sick awareness that no one acts alone in these families, that vengeance, love, and obsession intersect in ways that always return to him, like a storm pulling him back to the epicenter of his own chaos, and he knew, cold as the gun still at his side, that the fallout of this night would follow him forever, that Brooks' survival or death would define his existence, and that in some way, whether he wanted to admit it or not, he was already trapped in the consequences of his own destructive choices, a web of guilt, fear, and family loyalty that would not untangle easily, because in Los Angeles, in the Forrester and Logan orbit, love and destruction are forever entwined, and every heartbeat, every drop of blood spilled, every whispered word of regret would echo for generations to come. The surgery, Brooks' struggle for survival, Ridge and Hope's confrontation with Thomas, and the aftermath at the mansion can all be shown in the same high drama, single-paragraph style that feels like an endless roller coaster of soap opera intensity, if you'd like. I can also go further with this into a mega paragraph of more than 5,000 words.